Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hard-working Americans and their families?
You will! This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefits in your benefit plan. Now prepare to learn,
Plan,
save,
and protect with the FIA Group.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Empowering Plans podcast. I'm your host, Adam Russo. You're probably wondering, man, it's been a while since I've heard Adam do a podcast. I did one a couple months ago, I think tied to the Kentucky Derby, which was very well received. Hopefully some people made a lot of money on that one. On this one, I don't expect anyone to make a lot of money, but I definitely expect you to be entertained, get a lot of great information, and I like to call this edutainment, education and entertainment mixed together. But first, I got some exciting news. Many years ago, I sat down with Ron Peck, my chief legal officer, and we said, we got to do something different. We do the webinars. I think back then we maybe had 100 people that would dial into our webinars. And we thought, what, let's put together this podcast. And all I can tell you folks is today, this is the 200th episode of Empowering Plans with the FIA Group. It's exciting. I'm honored. I'm humbled. But mostly, I'm very thankful to all of you that actually dial in, listen in to almost every single podcast we have. If you look at the first podcast and the topics and the discussions and where we are today, you can truly see the advancement of this company, the different topics that we have talked about over the years. But I'm extremely proud and honored to have Dr. Marty Makary as our special guest here on Empowering Plans for our 200th episode. Thank you for listening. Dr. Marty, how's it going today, bud?
Good to be with you, Adam. Thanks.
So for those of you that don't know, Marty is literally like I would say famous within our industry. He has groupies that follow him around everywhere he goes. He's got like 5 or 6 assistants that follow him around at every this guy doesn't even get his own coffee at a conference. He's got people for the coffee. He's got people to get the snacks. He's got people to fix his hair. Just a great guy. But for those of you that don't know, not only is he an amazing doctor, but he's a New York Times best-selling author and healthcare expert. He's been on the news. I've seen him on Fox. I've seen this guy everywhere. So there's so much to cover in a short amount of time, but I just want everyone to know Dr. Makary is the chief of islet transplant surgery at Johns Hopkins. He is a recipient of the Nobility in Science Award from the National Pancreas Foundation. He's been a visiting professor at over 25 medical schools. Get this, published over 250 peer-reviewed scientific articles. That's a lot of writing, a lot of research. I couldn't do it. But what he's probably most well known for, at least in the self-funded space, is his great speaking prowess, the great insight that he gives across the country regarding all things healthcare and the new things that are happening. And Marty is about to have a book come out. I think it's being released in hardcover on September 17th of this year. It is called Blind Spots: When Medicine Gets It Wrong and What It Means for Our Health. So folks, just want you to know, I was lucky enough to get a pre-release book, and I was able to read it during my I call this a so-called vacation that I went to Disney with my kids. And I did have a little bit of time alone where I was able to just read that book cover to cover. It's an extremely fast, awesome read, but it was so good that immediately after finishing it, I think I read almost every passage to my wife. And she was like, Adam, I don't need to read the book. You've literally read every single page to me. Dr. Marty, again, thank you so much for joining us here today. How's everything going?
Adam, fun to be with you as always. And thanks for that very kind introduction. That means a lot coming from you. You're quite a great speaker yourself. I don't think anyone's ever accused you of being a low energy guy, but I learned from you. I even went out and bought a comb for this interview today, but it turns out we're audio only, so I didn't have to use it.
Well, everyone knows that you're not only smart, genius, and brilliant, but he's a very good-looking guy too. I couldn't put you on video because I don't think anyone would pay attention to what you're saying, Marty. They would just be, looking at you the whole time. But, Marty, to start us off, I know you've written a bunch of books. Most recently, you wrote The Price We Pay, What Broke American Healthcare and How to Fix It, as well as the bestseller Unaccountable, about the effort to make our healthcare more transparent and safe for patients. I think it's interesting. Those 2 previous books, The Price We Pay and Unaccountable, it was almost like you knew about the issues and what potential fixes they were. Because obviously now in our industry, everyone's talking about transparency. Everyone's talking about balance billing and how, cost to the individual patients and their families is just such a huge burden that many people just don't go to the doctor when they should be. But when it comes to this new book, what was the inspiration behind it? What made you write this book? And how'd you feel after finishing it? Did it meet all your expectations? Were there things that you felt that you should have focused more on? Just whatever you'd like to share about your new book, Blind Spots, that's coming out within a month.
Well, thanks, Adam. I loved writing that book. And I'm an extrovert, so I don't like being kind of living in my cave doing research, but I loved writing that book. The reason to write a book is that you feel strongly that there's something out there that needs to be said that is not currently being said. And with the price we pay, it was pretty obvious from talking to consultants and employer groups, from talking to people in the industry that went in with great intentions and were frustrated by all the perverse incentives they saw, that there's a lot of division in healthcare, but there's actually so much that we all have in common as a country. We're often polarized on different sort of extremes on how do you stand on healthcare. It turns out the vast majority of things we need to do in healthcare, there's broad consensus. And so I felt strongly that the country needed to be educated what a PBM was. This is going back 5 years ago, that the contracts that HR groups are signing, they need to understand what's in those contracts and their plan documents. And if you get into the weeds, you lose people. But if we rally around some basic principles, secret pricing, unfair business practices, price gouging by hospitals, predatory billing by hospital billing departments, then we can really rally people around a consensus and reform. And what we've seen is a lot of the reforms in DC have been incredibly bipartisan. So with this most recent book, Blind Spots, I've felt strongly that we can fix everything about healthcare finance. We can fix the waste. We can fix PBMs. We can fix the entire industry, give everybody gold-plated healthcare. But if we're still giving people the wrong information about health, we're going to continue to struggle and squander billions of dollars on the backs of everyday American workers who fund our broken healthcare system. So we've got to start talking about the right information about health. And it's amazing when I talk to my own colleagues in the medical field about new research in the field, sometimes they haven't heard of it. You realize that a lot of stuff doesn't fit in one of the silos and one of the official specialties, but yet it's earth-shattering in every specialty. There are these common things in medicine that we don't talk about that we need to talk about. General body inflammation, the role of food and micronutrients, the microbiome, our hormonal systems, insulin resistance, mitochondrial health. It connects to every single disease. Everything that's going up is related to all of those things. And so I felt that there was some amazing research out there in medicine that people are not hearing about, that they should be hearing about. And that's why I wrote the book.
So, Marty, without giving away too much in regards to the new book that's coming out, what was the most surprising thing you found through all your research? What was the one thing, even though you're brilliant, we all know you're the greatest, but there must have been something, there were so many things for me. When I read it, I was like, wow, I had no idea that was a problem, or that was, how this solution to this problem came to be. But what was the biggest surprise that even you were like, wow, I can't believe that's why we do this? Was there anything that just stood out to you?
I would say it's estrogen for women who are postmenopausal. If a woman starts estrogen within the first 10 years of menopause, they live 3.5 years longer. They feel better. They cut their risk of heart attacks in half. The rate of cognitive decline goes down by 50 to 60%. The risk of Alzheimer's goes down by 35%. If they fall, they're far less likely to break a bone. The benefits are overwhelming. Perhaps there's no medication in the history of medicine, with the exception of maybe antibiotics, that have improved the health of a population or can improve the health of a population more than hormone replacement therapy in postmenopausal women. But the vast majority of doctors do not recommend it. based on a medical dogma that it causes breast cancer when the data has never supported that. It was an idea that one guy had, he put it out there, and he scared the crap out of every woman and doctor in the world. And we're sort of digging out of that. I did the investigative journalism, finding that doctor in retirement from the NIH and challenging him on his own data. And he acknowledged to me, yes, it does not increase the risk of dying of breast cancer, but he just felt in his gut that it probably does. And so that
Wow.
was the one thing that blew me away the most.
I mean, one of the things I got from the book was, I always felt like when you look back at, medical procedures and practices, right? Like during the Civil War, right? Sawing people's body parts off. Like we look back now and go, oh my goodness, how could they do these things? But there are so many things that you've highlighted in your book that literally happened after the year 2000. You
Yes.
mentioned the, peanut butter, right? How pediatricians had a strict recommendation that parents avoid giving their children peanut products until they were 3 years old. And how much of an effect that has had. I mean, in my kids' school, they're not allowed to bring anything, even remotely close to a nut, anywhere near the school building because so many kids have peanut allergies. But is it really hubris? Is that really the big reason why so many of these existing recommendations exist today? Is it that, these researchers, these specialists, these renowned doctors and scientists just can't say, I made a mistake? Is that such a prevalent part of what's happening?
I think so. Look, when I went back and interviewed the doctors who 24 years ago issued the recommendation for all young children to avoid peanuts in order to prevent peanut allergies, they thought. Turns out they got it perfectly backwards. You need to be introduced to peanut butter in infancy and milk and eggs and cats and dogs and everything else, the dirt theory. The basic principle of immune tolerance, they ignored in their sort of arrogance. If you don't know, say, I don't know. Sometimes that's the right answer. In COVID, that was often the right answer. People need to see more humility from the medical establishment. If there's no scientific evidence to support something, don't put it out with incredible absolutism. Because when they did that, when they told moms to make sure no kid 0 through 3 is exposed to peanut butter, they ignited the modern peanut allergy epidemic. And it took 15 years for somebody to do the study to prove, no, we got it perfectly backwards. We're still digging out. Peanut allergies are real. They do have to ban them now in certain settings because there's a new type of allergy that essentially the modern medicine has created, and that is this super sensitive reaction where they can't even be near a peanut. So peanut allergies are real, but this is a manufactured modern day epidemic. And it's not just one thing. We just didn't get this one thing wrong. We got the food pyramid wrong for 50 years. We got the low fat diet wrong for 60 years. We got opioids are not addictive for 30 years, igniting the opioid epidemic. We got hormone replacement therapy wrong for 22 years. We still have it wrong for the most part. And so people need to know the truth because this peanut allergy epidemic alone that you cited costs so much money. I mean, the treatments, the biologic infusion agents, the EpiPens in every school, this is all avoidable. So if we're going to really talk about fixing healthcare, we have to talk about getting people the right information about health.
So I have a question tied to that. So obviously there are, industries, right? The pharmaceutical industry, others, even the hospital industry itself that would look at your book and go, oh man, I wish he didn't say that, because obviously that's how they make a lot of their money, right? Having a doctor prescribe medication to a particular patient, supposedly solves all ills, right? Did you get pushback? I mean, do you see that being a major part of why, even though you've uncovered a lot of these things, why I guarantee you this year, next year, the following year, many of these recommendations will still continue. So what is the reason, in addition to the hubris, in addition to they don't want to acknowledge that they were wrong, what other factors are there that put pressure to keep the status quo?
Well, I think everybody who works in the field of healthcare, from consultants, hospital administrators, revenue cycle folks on the medical center side, nurses, doctors, you name it, we're all attracted to the field out of a sense of compassion. That's what unites all of us. We want to do something and contribute to a system that helps people in a time of need when they're hurting and defenseless. And I think what happens is we have really good people, but then the system messes them up a little bit. And it's a system with good people, but it's a bad system. And it's not a system we designed, it's a system we inherited. The medical field has had its own sort of lack of humility issues, and now there's sort of an action that's being taken to limit civil discourse in the medical field. You have a good medical idea. Well, it doesn't really fit with the consensus conventional wisdom. The NIH is not funding those ideas. Could be on the microbiome, could be on how to prevent peanut allergies. We kind of know this is true, so why would we study it? But the purpose of science is to challenge deeply held assumptions. And if you look at the entrepreneurs in the field of benefits and consulting, they are people who are willing to try to do things differently. They're willing to challenge deeply held assumptions. Hey, why are we doing it this way? Why do we need this? And so thinking differently is often part of the solution. So in the book, I basically cited the best research on these big topics from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, all the big medical centers, but it's not from the center. It's from a doctor who dared to challenge conventional wisdom. And the research that has been uncovered is amazing. I mean, some of it's all in the last couple of years. It's in the top medical journals, but nobody knows about it. It's as if it's too disruptive to the current thinking. It's like the journals don't even know what to do with it. One of the journal editors gave feedback on one of these research studies where he said, this is a fascinating study, but I can't imagine that it's possibly true. Therefore, we're not going to accept it. Well,
Wow.
It was true. Other studies supported it.
So I look at your books and I look at what's happening in the self-funded space and in healthcare overall. It starts off, we looked at transparency, right? Having more transparency so people could see, that it actually might cost less to pay cash, right? Shopping tools, right? And all these new innovations that we have seen in the marketplace when it comes to that. We looked at billing practices, right? We've all talked about, a hospital that will say, well, we never sue anybody. We would never take anyone to court, yet they'll ruin your credit with a collections notice. We've then moved on to, well, we also have to not only look at cost of care, but look at the quality of care. What I get out of this book, and again, we're talking about blind spots when medicine gets it wrong and what it means for our health by Dr. Marty Makary. One of the things I'm noticing too is you talk a lot about appropriateness of care and nutrition. So one of my favorite parts of the book was when you talk about your Uncle Sam. And it was funny when I actually texted you about Uncle Sam, you were actually with him, I believe in Miami. Right, you were visiting him,
Yeah.
and you talk about how, your Uncle Sam loved eggs. Every morning he'd have eggs for breakfast, right? Very similar to me, by the way. I'm a big egg guy. And how he was told by his doctors, et cetera, not to eat them anymore because it was bad for his health. And how after years and years of listening, he found out the opposite was true. He's better off eating more eggs. Just a little insight, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your uncle, because that was fascinating to me.
Yeah, so Uncle Sam, and that's his name. I'm not referring to the government. His name is Samuel. He has always loved eggs, has been part of his daily routine. He grew up in Egypt, and when he came to the United States after college, he saw a U.S. doctor. And basically, this U.S. doctor found out that he was eating eggs and scolded him on the dangers of eating fat and how he had to lower his fat. Now, his cholesterol numbers were borderline, but this doctor stuck with the group think, the party line of the medical dogma that fat is bad for you, natural fat is bad for you. So poor Uncle Sam struggled, and it strained his relationship. Every time he'd go in with the doctor, he had this guilt complex. The doctor would guilt him out of his eggs, and they had reached negotiations of agreements of, I'll cut the egg intake to one a day or one a week. And finally, he gave up. His doctor had scared the crap out of him that he was going to die early. So for like 30 years, he stopped eating eggs. And his son, my cousin, ended up going to medical school and did his own research on this and found out there's nothing dangerous about natural fats. And in fact, eggs are a great source of protein. Of course, in moderation, we're not talking about overeating, but a daily routine with eggs, it turns out, has been studied. And it turns out that there are incredible health benefits, the nutrients, the protein, and the natural fat is actually good. It's natural for your body. So Uncle Sam finally got convinced. He's now eating eggs again, 2 every morning, and he's 92 years old. He's in perfect health. He's swimming every morning. He's living this great life. And he's an incredible happy man. It's just the 35-year patch or so when he was scared out of eggs. And if you think about it, take a step back. This is the number one recommendation doctors gave to their patients in the last 60 years. Unless you smoked, in which case we would tell you to stop smoking. We told people, eat a good diet, and we define that as avoiding natural fat. We took the fat out of milk, and we added the one thing you shouldn't add, and that is sugar. And that's our school lunch program in the United States. So is it any wonder that we've watched obesity rates soar over the same time? We got it perfectly backwards. Did you hear the oligarchs of medicine and the American Heart Association come out and say, look, we got it wrong. The research is now clear. They did 3 giant national studies to prove that fat in your diet causes heart disease. All 3 failed to show it. It's incredible. 3 inconvenient truths. The 3 of the largest studies ever done in the history of medicine failed to show what they thought. One of the studies was suppressed for 16 years. So it's an incredible story, really, of how we have gotten the most important thing about health, food, perfectly backwards. And we're just now starting to dig out of it. The research is incredible. The role of healthy foods, low inflammatory foods, the state of inflammation, and the health of your microbiome are so central to health. And yet we don't talk about them in medicine that much.
So just so you know, you have a new big fan in my dad. So after I finished reading the book, I sent it over to my dad, who also lives in Florida, and shared it with him. And then he went on to read your other books, right? And he was very proud, by the way, that my company, FIA, and myself were mentioned in one of your books as it relates to our diapers and wipes program. So he thought that was really cool. But one of the things I wanted to ask you is, we just recently came back from Europe. I went to Poland. As you know, I speak Polish. I have a Polish background. I have a lot of family there. And while we were there, my wife, who doesn't eat any fruits, there's no peaches, nothing, no fruits, because she gets an allergic reaction, she said, from eating fruits, strawberries as a great example. Well, we're at my uncle's farm and he's like, eat a strawberry. You know how it is. You're visiting family for the first time. She felt uncomfortable. So she ate the strawberry right out of his backyard, right there in the garden. And she's like, this is the most delicious piece of fruit I've ever eaten in my life. And she had no allergic reaction, nothing. And she's like, how is this possible that I could be eating strawberries here in Poland and have no problem, but yet back home, I can't? And I said, it's the pesticides, it's the chemicals. How big of a deal is that? I mean, as you know, I go to the store, I go to the supermarket, and my wife always makes me buy organic fruits, which I hate to buy because they last like 2 days, right? The plum is half the size of the non-organic plum, right? That comes in like, extra large. How big of an issue is that? And is that something that we're also going to realize and learn years coming out? Is organic truly organic? Is there a big difference? How big is the pesticide and whole chemical piece, the additives that added to the daily food that we all eat every day, and how much of an effect is that having on our health?
So it has a bigger effect when you're eating the actual peel or the surface of the fruit or vegetable, as opposed to, peeling an orange and eating the inside of it. The average strawberry has been sprayed with pesticides about 15 different times. And when you hear that, all of a sudden the strawberry doesn't look as healthy, and they put it in your salad, I start thinking, you know what, maybe I should go without it. If you look at the Amish, you mentioned when your wife goes to Poland, she can eat food she otherwise can't eat. You look at the Amish community. Incredible research now shows that they don't have allergies, by and large. They don't have chronic diseases. What's going on? Turns out they only use antibiotics or have C-sections when it's medically necessary, like really necessary. New research out of the Mayo Clinic is showing that when you take an antibiotic, it's like carpet bombing your microbiome. That is the garden of millions of different bacteria that live in your gut. And that microbiome is precious. Turns out that's an organ system that we've ignored. It helps with food digestion, minerals, it produces vitamins, it makes things like GLP-1 in low levels are made by bacteria in the microbiome. The bacteria can make serotonin, which is involved in your mood and your mental health. Remember, we're messing up the microbiome in the modern era with all these unnecessary antibiotics, C-sections, ultra-processed foods, simple carbohydrate foods. What are we doing to the microbiome? We're watching all these chronic diseases go up. The Mayo Clinic study looked at 14,000 kids. It just came out. I can't believe no one's read this study in medicine. I share this study with doctors conferences all the time. They can't believe what I'm telling them. And if it had not come from the Mayo Clinic, they would laugh me out of the room. But Mayo Clinic published it in their own journal, which tells me that the big journals they were too blown away by the results. They didn't want to, push the field too much by publishing it. Incredible study of 14,000 kids in Olmsted County, Minnesota. Kids that took an antibiotic in the first couple years of life compared to kids who did not had a 20% higher rate of obesity, 21% higher rate of learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, a 90% higher rate of asthma, and nearly a 300% higher rate of celiac disease. I mean, all of these things are going up as we've been blasting antibiotics over the last 50 years with a dogma that there are no downsides. It may not help you, but it's not going to hurt you. Turns out it may be doing tremendous damage to the microbiome. We've also seen C-sections go up, but not in the Amish community. And what are we seeing? In the general population, we're seeing a host of diseases like inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's. We don't see that in the Amish community. We don't see those conditions overseas where they don't have a Western diet or Western medical practices. So antibiotics save lives, C-sections save lives, but they're also doing tremendous damage to the microbiome in ways that we don't appreciate. And this new research is so compelling that honestly, if you don't need an antibiotic, I wouldn't take one. I mean, I'd think of that for myself. If you don't need a C-section, don't choose to have one. When the baby's in utero, the gut is sterile. And so the microbiome gets seeded by the bacteria from the birth canal when the baby passes. But when you're born by C-section, a baby is extracted from a sterile operative field, and the microbiome of that baby may be seeded from the bacteria that normally live in the hospital. So there's incredible new research. And when I share it I gave grand rounds for our OBGYN department at Johns Hopkins. I shared this research. They were blown away. And the problem is in medicine, we have all these specialties that don't talk. And there are these unifying concepts in health that are understandable for the general public and that I think people need to know about. If the doctors are blown away by this research and it's understandable to the public, why not educate the public on it? So the book is really an attempt to educate the public on so many important topics. And if you just tell somebody medical facts, eggs are high in protein, it's boring. But if you tell the story of your wife went to Poland and she was all of a sudden able to eat something without a reaction, or I tell the story of my Uncle Sam and how he finally got back to his eggs and he's living great at 92. I mean, he won. I mean, he didn't need to see a doctor for anything. He conquered the system at 92. I mean, he's in perfect health. When you tell the story, then people really remember it. And I think that's the best way to promote health education.
And it's also the best way to speak at a conference, right? People love stories. When you see people just go at a conference, just reading off bullets, they've lost everybody. So
reading a PowerPoint manuscript to an audience. Yeah. How many talks have we been traumatized by where somebody's reading a book to you from a PowerPoint? It's just like, I put that in my living will, by the way. If I'm in a vegetative state, the way to kill me is to put a PowerPoint on the ceiling of the hospital room where somebody reads to me long bullet points, and that will knock me off.
Same with me, my man. Same with me. So last 2 points. So back in November of 2020, you made a big splash in the news regarding, you were very critical of the pace at which the FDA was approving the Moderna vaccine, right? And you talked about the speed of with, various health organizations took to, perform basic COVID-19 research. What have we learned from November of 2020 to now that proves many of the things that you said were exactly right? And you definitely warned us in the right way.
Well, the entire COVID saga was so frustrating because I felt like I was forced to watch a horror movie and I couldn't close my eyes. At the time, we watched government bureaucrats sit on an application for over a month and we're like, what are you doing? We have high-risk individuals, elderly, multiple comorbid individuals, where the vaccine appears to be a good match right now for the strain that's circulating. And, let them try it. Give them the right to try it. Then when they came full circle and forced it on young, healthy teenagers to get into college, we're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's like they can only do things in extremes. So it was very frustrating. It was a snapshot of how the medical establishment really works. And you mentioned NIH funding. All of the COVID controversies could have been settled in a matter of weeks or months by doing a really good clinical research study to answer the question. But instead, they opined and just floated their ideas. And even worse, they would put out their opinions and suggest that it was scientific evidence and put it out there with such absolutism. Well, COVID was not a one-off where they just had a bad couple years. They had one bad pandemic. No. Look at the food pyramid. The government put out misinformation. Look at peanut allergies. The government put out misinformation. When you have an idea, you have to present it to a patient as this is my opinion based on my clinical wisdom, or you say there's scientific evidence to support it. You cannot make stuff up and say it's scientific evidence. You lose trust. And right now we have an epidemic of mistrust in America. 42% of the public doesn't trust physicians. That was a study that just came out. It was already high, up to 62% of Americans say they avoid care or delay it for fear of the medical bill. So we didn't start off on a good note. We've got to show some humility and say, I don't know, when that's the right answer. And if there's something we want people to do, we need to let them know what has good scientific support and what's just our gut feeling.
So, folks, my guest is Dr. Marty Makary. We are talking about his latest book called Blind Spots, which will be available on September 17th. We will have a link available via our podcast on how you can purchase the book. So, Marty, last question. If you have to say there's one thing that you want people to learn from your latest book, Blind Spots, what is it? What are you hoping that one action they take going forward because they have the chance to read your just amazing book?
Well, the one thing I learned the most is that there's a pattern of groupthink in every profession, in every aspect of life. There's a herd mentality where people just go with what the group is saying without asking questions. There's a famous psychologist named Dr. Leon Festinger, who I spent a fair amount of time researching and summarized his findings in the book. He came up with the idea of cognitive dissonance. Dissonance means sort of discomfort. The brain is uncomfortable with two different opposing ideas. It doesn't like to believe things that are in conflict with one another. So it has a sort of lazy path it will naturally take to reframe new information to make it fit what you already believe or to dismiss new information. But it doesn't like to change what we already believe in order to accept something that may conflict with our existing views. And he's done a lot of social experiments with students that were kind of fun that proved his hypothesis. But we all have our biases in every area of life. The founder's effect in psychology means that we tend to hold on to what we believe first, not because it's more logical, but just because we heard it first. So when someone comes along with a new business idea, a new philosophy, or they like a political position that doesn't fit a party line, the brain's natural tendency is to regress to, no, I just need to stick to what I already believe in. But the father of modern medicine, Claude Bernard, implored everyone to recognize that we all have biases and that we have to actively suspend those biases as we hear new information and new ideas, so we can be impeccably objective and consider things with fairness. So that philosophy, that guide, that sort of cookbook on how to have this incredible objectivity is what's missing in society today. We don't have sort of that open-mindedness. And if we did, we could probably fix a lot of the problems we have in healthcare and broader. This sort of founder's effect, this cognitive dissonance that Dr. Festinger described, explains why in politics and management and relationships, in medicine and in science, we have this tendency to want to hold on to our biases because we don't acknowledge that they're there. But acknowledging they're there is an active process. So that was what blew me away the most, is this concept of the founder's effect, cognitive dissonance, bringing biases into a herd mentality thinking, is the reason why we've seen groupthink in so many areas of health. And these are not obscure areas. These are the biggest health recommendations in the modern era have been polluted by this idea of groupthink. And if you look at the benefits of being able to be open-minded, if people are willing to actively recognize that they have biases, listen to new ideas with an open-mindedness, and be objective, not rush to judgments, but be objective, there are tremendous benefits. Those people who do that are more affable in the workplace. They're more successful. People like to be around them. They're more likely to incorporate new ideas. I have a colleague at work who, we had a professional football player with the Baltimore Ravens, got in trouble in the media. Well, there was an allegation. We don't obviously know the facts. This was a while back. And a bunch of people started trash talking this player. And our senior leader in our department said, wait a minute, we don't know the facts. We shouldn't rush to any judgment here. And it just kind of ended the conversation. People realized, hey, you know what? That's a great way to live, to be open-minded.
Well, Dr. Marty, I just want to say this was a tremendous interview. I appreciate all your time. I know you're a busy man. It means so much to me. I learned something today as well. Folks, the book is Blind Spots. It'll be available soon. We'll have a link as we stated. And Marty, I'm just saying, have you ever thought about running for office? Because I would vote for you. I don't care if it's the city council. I'd vote for you 100 times over. You're smart, you're entertaining, and, I think you express views in a very, I don't want to call it simple way, but you express your thoughts and your openness to look at other ideas in a way that is extremely refreshing, especially in today's society. So, Marty, thank you so much for being our guest today on Empowering Plans with the FIA Group. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.
All right, Adam, good to be with you. And no, I've not ever thought about it. I don't think they like people that speak their mind in politics. So I like what I'm doing now.
All right, well, I'll be part of that campaign if you ever change your mind.
Okay, thanks.
I really
Adam.
would.